Managing a country's budget is an enormously complex business, fraught with difficulty. The digital age has delivered a plethora of tools and systems that will help facilitate and streamline the process and allow governments in lower income countries to massively improve the collection and the distribution of their finances. But the abundance of ideas and apps and systems can in itself be confusing and difficult. So to clear away some of that confusion, the Singapore consulting firm AlphaBeta teamed up with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to produce a study called Digital Innovation in Public Financial Management. The study provides an analysis of the digital landscape in this field and also a roadmap for the effective implementation of its recommendations in low-income countries. From digital payment systems to geospatial data analytics, AlphaBeta did the legwork to find the most powerful tools that will strengthen public financial management. I spoke to AlphaBeta's co-founder and director, Fraser Thompson. So, PFM, explain what you mean by that, and specifically, your report is talking about the impact that it can have in low-income countries. Can you just sort of, in layman's terms, quantify what's the difference between a country that practices sound financial management and one that is struggling with its systems?
Thank you, Timo. Public finance management sounds very technical, but it's actually crucial to most government services that get delivered. And basically, public finance management refers to the laws, the rules, the systems, and the processes used by governments to generate revenue, so i.e. taxation, to allocate public funds, to conduct spending, and to audit those funds. So it basically refers to all the ways that governments raise and spend money. And obviously the reason why it's so crucial is maybe obvious, but particularly when resources are so scarce, any wastage in that system, whether it be through corruption or just poorly targeted spending, is of crucial significance from a development outcome.
Obviously, managing your money is very important in every context. But again, I mean, just tell me about the scope of benefit that comes from doing this in an updated, technology-driven context, as opposed to something that's not.
Yeah, look, good question. It's probably useful to break it down into different areas to sort of illustrate the kind of benefits we're talking about. And there's an important contextual factor here that we've seen this digital revolution happen in a range of different sectors of our economy. And you consider just the 1 billion additional people that have been added to the internet subscribers from 2013 to 2017. So this digital revolution has been happening. But when it comes to public finance management, it's like the digital revolution hasn't happened to a large degree yet. A lot of countries are still using relatively antiquated systems, which are costly to maintain and which are not fit for purpose. And so to get a sense of the potential role of digital here, it's worth thinking about a few different opportunities. So this includes everything from blockchain technologies to increase accountability, using government digital payments, or even things like geospatial systems to improve tax compliance.
Right. So, I mean, you have identified 5 what you call key technologies that could help in this regard. But before we get onto them, just again from the broad perspective, is it possible to talk about applying such technologies in a context like Asia, where the range of economic, cultural, social, technological situations and realities is so vast and disparate? Is there a one-size-fits-all solution for this?
Yeah, look, it'll look very different by country, but the potential is huge across all countries, and particularly in low-income countries in Asia, given the amount of wastage and inefficiencies in the system today. And just to give you an example of this, take India's digitization of its subsidy payments. They've estimated to save $20 billion US, or roughly 1% of GDP, through this particular program alone. Considering in other countries where they deliver sort of food programs, the food programs have been able to lower 15% of the costs through using digital payments to deliver that to the people in need. So these are not just small benefits, these are transformational benefits that we're talking about.
Why is it then that so many countries are either ignorant of these potential solutions or perhaps not quick enough to adopt them?
Look, it's a good question, and I think part of the challenge is that there tends to be a bit of a lock-in factor here. So a lot of particularly developing countries have bought systems and processes previously, which are very complicated, quite expensive, and that creates kind of a lock-in where they've had to follow these antiquated processes and haven't had the flexibility to adapt their systems through new technologies. So I think that's one important factor. The second, I think there's a big information gap. And that was a big motivation for our report with the Gates Foundation, was to just shine a light into this area to show what is actually available and what could be used by low-income countries. And then I think the third one is that it's important to remember here that these technologies will not work exactly the same way in different countries. And there can be a temptation for certain countries to try to leap for the Rolls-Royce model of digital technologies when they may be something which is better off with a mini minor version or something that's a bit simpler to begin with to get their feet wet.
Yeah, and this is always the case with reports like yours, isn't it? You do the academic and the fundamental research work, but translating that into real life and real practice is the challenge. How do countries make that transition? I mean, how can they access not just the knowledge, but the ability to implement that knowledge?
Yeah, look, it's a good point, and part of the aim of our research was not to basically just create something that gets people excited, but then there's not a roadmap to implementation. In the research, we looked at not only the potential, but what are lessons learned from countries that have actually successfully implemented this. And there are a few key lessons that came out of that. Number one was know your starting point. So really understand what's your country's specific context and readiness to implement these different types of technologies. And having a real sort of cost-benefit analysis of what technologies are most suitable given that level of development.
So project preparation study, in other words.
Project preparation is one example of how that could be done. The second piece of that is being really clear on the objectives. So sometimes countries make the mistake of starting with the technology rather than starting with the problem that they're trying to solve. So, for example, if it comes to taxation, countries may not need the most sophisticated geospatial system to target a certain set of households where there's concerns about non-compliance of tax payments. There may be something simpler by just segmenting a particular share of the population where they really want to focus these technology developments. So that clarity on objectives is really important to making sure that the technology actually solves a really clear problem. The third one is something we say a lot, but it is really crucial, adopting a phased rollout. The countries that really did this well, they often start off with some pilots, and these pilots were important to not only work out the kinks in the system, but also to get buy-in within the government bureaucracy itself. And that's something we often don't think about, but an important barrier to change can often be the cultural shift that's needed within the government to make this happen. So this kind of phase rollout, building momentum can be really important with some of these technologies. The fourth area was around finding champions in the public sector to really lead this initiative. And given the significant cultural shift that's needed, it is really crucial to have those people who are kind of going to be banging the table within senior levels of government to overcome the kind of natural resistance we could see to some of these technologies. And some of that resistance is just because of a lack of familiarity of government officials. Some of it because some could directly lose from this. Some officials who may be getting side payments, for example, obviously would be threatened by these new transparency systems.
Okay. So, sorry, carry on.
Well, look, and then I just going to say the last ones is really around focusing on not just the mindset, the skills here, but also the mindset shift that's needed. And in South Africa is a great example of here where they actually put a direct incentive program in there to give civil servants an incentive to implement this and to overcome the kind of the fear and the inertia that's normally there.
It's a really good roadmap and thoughtful, but I can't help thinking somewhat cynically that it poses as many challenges and obstacles as it sort of solves. But let's put that aside and talk about the actual technologies that you're looking at, because this report, part of what you did was actually look at that landscape of available technologies and their applications and broke them down into 5 areas that you think are really the key ones. Let's run quickly through what those are.
Sure. So we identified 60 technology applications that were relevant to different areas of public finance management. And these 60s, they group into 5 families, if you like, of technologies. The first family is around digitization of payments. So these are basically replacing cash-based or in-kind payments with digital transfers. We've seen a lot of this in India, for example, which has been one of the leaders in this of digitizing payments. Also, countries like Kenya have really led on this front as well. Then there's the second group, which
Let me just talk about digitization for a minute. A lot of countries around the world are looking at easier payments, cheaper payments, more efficient payments, and the value of that is obvious to most of them. One of the problems is there are so many different ways of doing this, so many competing, not only technologies, but companies and models here. How do you get through that minefield?
Well, look, it's a good and tricky question, and a lot of that is very contextual. One of the key things that we have seen is how do you create interoperability between different payment mechanisms. One of the worst outcomes is if you get a range of different technology and payment mechanisms which are all run completely differently and have a lack of interoperability. And in that case, you lose a lot of the benefits that you were trying to create in the first place. One of the important reforms that India did on its digital journey was to try to create that interoperability between some of those digital payment mechanisms. And that's been quite a crucial enabler for some of the success that they've had.
Okay. So one of the other areas you've identified, which is related, is blockchain. Some of the payment systems are blockchain based. But is blockchain ready for prime time in some of these countries? Is that not just a complication to what could actually be achieved in different ways much more easily?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to understand blockchain we've come to associate with cryptocurrency and sort of speculative behavior that has no real, not necessarily a productive use. And the unfortunate thing about that, and I'm not going to get into the debate around cryptocurrency here, but it obscured the fact that blockchain itself has a much wider set of applications and really important for development outcomes when you need to build in transparency and trust. And essentially, what a blockchain is a digital distributed ledger. So it's a continual growing list of records that are linked and secured using cryptography. And it has a range of different applications in public finance management. The first one is around enhancing transparency and oversight. So to give you an example, Georgia has been using blockchain to secure government records. And so they put everything on things like land registries, which are incredibly important documents, particularly in low-income countries, into a blockchain, which creates both transparency and security around those records. The second thing it does is it improves operational efficiencies. So Dubai, and I know Dubai is obviously not a low-income country, but they're planning to move all their government transactions onto blockchain by 2021. And they believe that will eliminate 100 million paper transactions and save the equivalent of 25 million working hours. So a huge sort of efficiency gain. And then the last one is basically better service delivery. So you can effectively, going forward, allow claimants such as welfare payments to have apps where they can manage their different benefit payments, and all these are delivered securely through blockchain technology. So that kind of transparency, operational efficiency, and better service delivery for end users are really three major benefits of blockchain.
All right, let's get on to the third area you've identified. And it's a word that always seems to now go hand in hand with the whole idea of digital technology, and that's data. How do data analytics play into the conversation?
Yeah, look, good question. And big data analytics is a huge opportunity area in public finance management. And I think the starting point is if you just think about some of the challenges that countries have with tax compliance. So we saw in India, they've started using geospatial technologies to look at tax evasion. And this can be just as simple as satellite technology, looking at someone who basically has a pool in their backyard and a very fancy looking house, but is reporting very minimal income. So it's a way of identifying where they're kind of outliers. Don't worry, I'm not sure if Singapore is using this at the moment here, and that alone has been able to basically triple the tax revenue that certain states in India were able to reap through just simple use of that technology alone. We've seen the same thing in terms of in Mexico of bringing greater tax compliance, of also using geospatial. So it's got a range of test cases across different countries, different levels of development where it's been really useful.
So is this a geospatial context that you're talking about, part of the geographic information systems, which you also talk about in the report, or is that a separate thing?
Yeah, it's a big part of that. And often these technologies overlap, right? So the really biggest benefit is often when we see an integration of different technologies. So geospatial technology by itself is useful, but when you combine it with big data technologies, which essentially allow us to crunch large, often heterogeneous and unrelated streams of data from multiple sources to derive insights, then you start to get something really powerful. And the countries that have done this well have used a combination of geospatial plus this big data technology to understand where the biggest opportunities are, particularly in tax evasion.
Okay, and let's get on to the last one, which I guess is probably a very important one in terms of all governments, and that's e-procurement.
Yeah, look, e-procurement, it's a massive area, and it's the amount of kind of wastage that happens in public procurement is incredible. So when you consider the fact that some of the benefits, first of all, start off with countries that have done this, we've seen e-procurement has led to an increase in bidders. So often to 2.5 to 3 times the amount of bidders for government projects than they've had previously, just because it becomes easier for particularly smaller companies to be able to bid for larger government projects. The second thing it's done is that it's reduced the amount of direct contact with public officials, and that reduces the risk for corruption as well. And then the third thing is that it's often been associated with whistleblowing channels as well. And to give you an example of how these have been used, Brazil has a transparency portal which has information on public spending, sanctioned contractors, and feedback that's provided by the community. And that alone last year had 1 million unique visitors. So there's a range of benefits of improving transparency, improving efficiency, and corruption, and reducing corruption in public procurement.
All right, let's get back to the issue of how this stuff gets implemented then. Because again, I mean, you've got a framework for a roadmap on what the process should be of implementation. You've got a bunch of technologies that you've identified. You've got specific technologies and bits of software that you said are best in class for these things. But how does a low-income country, let's say someone from a low-income country says, right, I buy it. I understand. I want some advice on this. Where can they go to learn how to do it, how to do the study, how to do the preparation, how to access the information, and I guess most critically, how to pay for it? I mean, there are institutions like the ADB that might help on this, but where can they go and how can they make this happen?
Well, I think this is an important point, and this goes beyond the scope of the research, but I'll give you my reflections on this of having seen countries grapple with this. I think part of the challenge we often overlook is that the people giving advice to some low-income countries on this often themselves are not as familiar as they should be with some of these technology developments. And so they tend to recommend solutions that they have recommended previously in years gone past, not realizing that there's a potentially a better, more flexible way for countries to actually implement public finance management systems. So one of the big things that I would call for is actually we start a real education program amongst the advisor community and multilateral institutions included, to make sure all the people that engaged on public finance management issues are aware of these latest technologies and how they can be applied in different country contexts.
So this is an existing program, is it?
No, these are not existing programs. This is my musings of basically where I think some of the reform program needs to go.
All right.
Then once we have that aspect, then for a country to understand where does it start, it's important to come back to some of those lessons I mentioned earlier. So what is that country's starting point and what are they really trying to achieve in this particular area? In some cases, we defined countries at different states. We talked about a pre-readiness stage, and these are where the basic conditions are not in place to use the technology solutions, and in some cases, more traditional approaches may be beneficial. Then there's a second stage, which is around basic readiness, where the country has some of the enabling conditions in place to use some basic technology, but it may be more limited in scope. And then you finally have the third category where there's advanced readiness, where countries have the opportunity to use more advanced and widespread adoption of technologies. Now, each of them in the report, we lay out what kind of characteristics are associated with each of those stages of readiness. And that's a really important starting point for countries to have a really transparent and open conversation. So, well, where are we today? Not where do we want to be, but where are we today? And how do we create a roadmap that takes that into account? And maybe it means we start with something fairly basic to begin with.
So your report is the first step. Where can people access that?
So that is available from our website on AlphaBeta, so www.alphabeta.com. And you'll find it if you search our website for public finance management. And this is a report we did with the Gates Foundation. So it is also available through the Gates Foundation website as well.
Excellent stuff. Fraser, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Timo.